Good evening, everybody. I'm Tele-Aviacion, and welcome to This Week in El Salvador. I hate to say it, but it's been much more than a week. I have to say that it's been kind of difficult with all of the things and bad articles that I've been reading from the press, from the Times, from the, Al Jazeera. They always seem to have really bad things, mean-spirited things to say about El Salvador that have basically no basis in fact, just to be able to do whatever they can to kind of grind in, because now all of a sudden the media sources are so interested in El Salvador, which I know that isn't the case, but we'll not get into that for right now. But anyway, when I was there last, I was fortunate enough to be able to interview three people that are the relatives of the late Jose Arturo Castellanos Contrerras. He was a very famous El Salvadoran, and it's very important in considering what's happening now in El Salvador. It's literally like a new country starting all over again. It's like the Continental Congress was here in the United States almost 250 years ago. It's just a very important time in El Salvador. They're trying to create new laws for Bitcoin, new laws for banking. They're doing all that they can to help children, the school system, the financial system. It's a really big job. But I think it's very important that people have pride, and that is one thing that I've seen in El Salvador when I've been there. And for this last year, there is a feeling of pride sweeping the nation, feeling that, wow, we can do things. We can have this great country that we've wanted to have, that we've envisioned. We can have leaders that actually really care and listen to what it is we're trying to do. And it's with this, and in keeping with the spirit of this, that I want to talk about one of the great El Salvadorans, and there have been many. But this gentleman, Arturo Castellanos, he was a person who actually could have saved, and is believed saved, anywhere from 40,000 to 100,000 Jews. And I'll get into that. This is during World War II, obviously. The people that I interviewed were his grandson, Francisco Arturo Castellanos Garcia, his Arturo's two daughters, Maria Julia Isabella Ruht and Blanca Luz Castellanos. Both incredible. All of them were incredible people. And Arturo, his grandson, is the spitting image of him. He looks so much like his grandfather. What a fantastic testament to know you had a grandfather and that you resemble him. All incredible people, and told me the story that probably is not known. There is not a lot. It's not. I believe he has been in books, but I don't know that there are any specific large books that tell the story of how he was able to rescue all of these Jewish people in at the time, World War II countries, through Nazi Germany, all through the Eastern Europe and parts of Western Europe, how he was able to do this. But I'm going to go into this. So you'll pardon me, but I have to kind of look at the piece of paper because there are a lot of bits of information that they gave me. And so what I can tell you is he was born in 1893. That's pretty common knowledge. He was one of 8 children. Now, at 4 years of age, his mother died. I'm not exactly sure what happened with his father. I do know that he did come from a military family. But at the age of 4, he was raised by his aunt, and she was Saldiva. She raised them. I'm not sure exactly what his childhood was like, but he must have just had a very empathetic upbringing to really feel the pain of others. That must have been part of how he lived his life at the time. He wasn't really religious. They said that his family was Catholic. I guess they were practicing, but he wasn't per se Catholic, or didn't really observe any religion. As his daughter said, he was just simply a good man. And boy, what an understatement. And as I go through this story, you'll see what an understatement that is. So apparently when he was 16 years old, he ended up going to military school. I'm not exactly sure of the complete history of it, but ultimately he ended up in Turin, Italy, where he went to their school to be able to, I guess, learn the finer points of being a military leader. Apparently, while he was there, or between the time he ended up becoming a general and studying in Turin, up till that time, I guess he had garnered quite a reputation in El Salvador. People really liked him, and he was well known. So well known, in fact, that President Martinez at the time was a little nervous of having him in El Salvador, and that's probably why General Arturo Castellanos was able to go to Europe and study. And while he was studying in the military school, he ended up being befriended by King Umberto II of Italy. So I'm not sure who befriended who, but apparently I suspect that this king and his royal staff and all of the people that he met probably invariably was the reason that ultimately that Castellanos was able to become a military, not just known in the military there, but also to become in the work in the consulate and become part of that establishment. And so in keeping with that, at some point, 37, 38, he was he was in the consulate working as the diplomat representing El Salvador in Germany. Now, there are a few stories that it was at that time that he met a gentleman by the name of Mandel. His name was, actually, let me get that down. His name was Gregory Mandel. And he was from Romania, or to be more exact, Transylvania, but he was Jewish. And being Jewish, apparently he was in trouble in Germany, even though Germany had already had Kristallnacht and was serious, but the final solution wasn't exactly, it was in its beginning phases and hadn't totally metastasized as we know that it did later on in the 30s and 40s. But at that point, he met this gentleman and he helped him. This is apparently, I believe, the first person he may have helped to give him essentially the paperwork that showed that he was an El Salvadoran national, that he was a citizen of El Salvador. And in the process, his name was changed from Mandel to Montello. And later on, they worked together towards this effort, but in the meantime, apparently he had done some other work towards helping Jews with paperwork there while he was in Germany. And as to whether he was caught doing it, I'm not sure, but there were some issues that may have led to an assassination attempt on Castellanos. But in fact, he even, surprisingly, his family told me this, had even communicated with the people in El Salvador, namely the president, that he and his staff, that he wanted to be able to help the Jews that were in Germany and throughout Western Europe by offering them citizenship, but was given a resounding no and told he couldn't do it. Well, all I know is I guess he never made that mistake again, and he decided to just work this crusade on his own. Somehow, I'm not sure, he ended up going to Switzerland and serving as a diplomat in Switzerland. There he became reacquainted with Mandel or Montello, and he appointed him as part of his staff, his diplomatic staff. And then he met another gentleman by the name of Gustavo Guerrero, who was an older gentleman at the time, but had already been one of the founding members of the League of Nations, which is the predecessor to the United Nations. And Guerrero he was an incredible lawyer. He actually headed he was one of the judges at The Hague. He had various encounters with the Nazis when they came to take over the Netherlands. But nonetheless, he was still involved, and I guess at that time was in Switzerland. And apparently, prior to the takeover of Holland, it was both in Holland and in Belgium, where I guess Guerrero spent a lot of his time, where they were able to generate all of the documents that needed. And I believe it was Montello who was able to supply a lot of them. Apologize, I think it was Guerrero who was able to supply a lot of the paper stock that was used for these official documents. And so within a time of span of about 4 years, they had created anywhere between 10 and 13,000 documents. Now what's interesting is these documents, they didn't even know that they existed. It was believed to be existed, but it's only until the late, I think at 2000, maybe before 2004 or so, when they found a large case of these documents in one of the consulates in Geneva, Switzerland. And then it became known exactly what type of documents they had, and that served as proof to show that they had actually done this. And in fact, a lot of these documents quite probably were taken from the actual Jews at the time that were able to leave Germany and other places, possibly Italy and other places in Europe, where Jews actually escaped into Switzerland. And there were actually quite a few of them there. These documents, of course, were used for people. Initially, they were to the leaders of the family, the matriarchs and the patriarchs of the family. And then in some instances, they had many family members on these documents, and some they were only able to show the lineage of a grandfather and a grandmother as being El Salvadoran citizens, and therefore the other members of the family, daughters and granddaughters, sons and grandsons, were able to use these same documents. That's why it's estimated between 40,000 and 100,000 Jews were saved as a result of this. Then, and so Guerrero and Montello and Castellanos were able to continue doing this. And somehow they were able to do this under the nose of the Nazis. And in fact, I was told by the family that a lot of German people were actually in Switzerland at the time. Probably quite a few of them were spies. And 2 of them were actually guarding the office of Castellanos. But Castellanos, he laughed at the Germans. I asked them, I said, was he afraid of them at all? And his daughter said no. He laughed at them. He thought they were funny. And in other words, he was laughing at death. He was so convinced, had such a heart, and was convinced and great conviction that he was going to do whatever he had to do no matter what. The reason he even said he did it, he said anybody would have done it in his situation. Perhaps, but not likely. He took an incredible chance. So it was, in producing a lot of these documents, a lot of people, these El Salvadoran citizens at this point, were able to use these documents to emigrate to other countries. Now, I was a little confused initially because I assumed they all somehow went through El Salvador, but that's not the case. See, what happened is during the time of Germany, a lot of Jews actually tried to come to many different countries and were not accepted because they were known as German citizens. And they did, for some reason, a lot of countries wanted to remain neutral on this. And the United States turned back thousands of Jewish people that were in ships destined for the United States and told them they had to head back home. Virtually no country would do anything. So apparently part of the master plan of the documentation was that since El Salvador only had at the time probably 2 or 3 million people, it did not have the same restrictions on travel into the United States and other places throughout the world because it was such a small country. And they weren't really concerned, so they had no specific laws. All they knew is, according to the Constitution of El Salvador, if a person had this documentation showing that they were legally citizens of El Salvador, that's all that they really needed. So in this process, they ended up going to, a lot of them ended up getting into Switzerland. Some of them went to other countries, Palestine, the United States, Canada, all over different places of the world, South America. And in fact, there were some of them that were going to Greece, and there were boatloads of people that were going there. And Castellanos was able to get an election of the Greek people in that area in order to give the Jewish people their rights to at least be able to come there and work. And so they lived on the ship by night, and they were able to work, and then they would travel back and forth so they could work in the day and then go back to live on the ship. And this happened apparently for a couple of years. Again, this is little bits of information that I got from his daughters that is not really commonly known. So really in this plan, he ended up saving so many people. I mean, people that he could have never met. But can you imagine, I mean, generating this many documents, even in a couple of years, it's a monumental feat. And so finally, when the war was over, one added detail is that some of these documents, or many of them, were actually sent into two concentration camps on behalf of certain individuals. And apparently the Nazis kept incredible records these documents were actually able to save the lives of Jews that were captured and still in Treblinka and Auschwitz and the different death camps that they had there. So they were actually able to help people that already were in these camps. So I guess after the war had ended, Castellanos, I'm not sure, I assume that Mandelo and Guerrero stayed there. I know Guerrero continued working up until the late 40s in The Hague as part of the legal staff there. But Castellanos ended up going back to England for a while, and then he went back to El Salvador, but he was not greeted well because at that point the president realized what he had done. And you would think at the time, in the late 40s, people would have wanted to take credit and say it was their idea for doing such a heroic, monumental humanistic deed. But no, apparently a lot of the atrocities of Nazis didn't come out until the early 50s. And at that point, I guess there was still a certain amount of sympathy towards the Nazis at that point. And plus, they were very mad that he had somehow duped his government and provided all of this rescue to people that at the time, or it was done, let's say, in an illegal way. And so Castellanos had to move into Mexico, and then he was there for a while. Several attempts on his life were made. Even the next president after Martinez wasn't too happy about him, but then at some point, Castellanos was able to move back into El Salvador. There he lived a pretty modest life, I understand from his family, pretty much gave up everything he had. He always tried to help people. They said that at one point he won the lottery and he gave all the money to all of his family members so they could get houses. And he lived in very modest means. And in fact, never told anybody there. Nobody really knew about what he had done until 1972, when the famous writer Leon Uris, who wrote Exodus, came to interview him. Now, he had already written Exodus in the 50s, but he, I guess, had interviewed the families of Guerrero and Mandel and Mandel, and as a result had a little bit of information but wanted to confirm this. And it's at that point that his family, at that point 9 children, had become aware of the incredible things and heroic things that their father had done. And he had no need to tell anybody of what he had done. In fact, it was almost as if it was part of his life. He felt he had done the best that he could, and that's all that he cared about. But boy, when I think of a person like that, everybody, one of the biggest things that people like in life is to be able to show that, or have it be known, the good things that they've done, because often the things that people know about us the most are when they caught us doing something that wasn't quite right. But any of the really, really good things that we felt that we've done, nobody really knows about it. And it's almost like we feel bad about that. Well, you know something? I don't feel bad about that at all. I use that as a model. We do things because they're right. And we did it because we had to. His attitude, even though it's impossible, his attitude was that anybody would have done it. But I don't believe that's the case at all. But if anybody would have done it, I bet you they'd have been from El Salvador. because El Salvadorians are the type of people that have a heart. El Salvadorian peoples are the type of people that have empathy for their fellow man. That is why I feel El Salvador deserves all of the things that are happening in terms of a great future, deserves Bitcoin, a great economy that is going to help El Salvador elevate them to where I believe at some point they'll probably be as rich or richer than Israel. But in the meantime, it's because of the people that work so hard in El Salvador and have worked so hard for so many years that now we have the beginning of a new nation starting that is going to be by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth, just like the plans of the original Continental Congress, except this time it's going to happen. So I leave you with that message. I'm so proud to have met the family of Castellanos. What incredible people, what incredible models of how I want to be in my life. And I just wish you all a great evening, and I look forward to getting back with you again, where I'm sure I'm going to have another interesting story about a great El Salvadoran. Thank you so much, and good night.